He starts every podcast. He goes, 3, 2, 1. Yes. Wes.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Hey, wait. Who's asking the questions here?
Oh, well.
Welcome to the podcast, Wes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me here.
I'm super glad you're here. What do you think about the podcast I did with your wife last week, Dr. Morgan? Huh?
You know, I was really quite impressed with that. The thing about Morgan is that she's really smart. And she has, let's say, a wide breadth of knowledge and a lot to say on a variety of topics. So it's always interesting if you get her moving.
Oh yeah,
she's got content. She can fill up a stat sheet.
That podcast, if we went into detail, I think we could have broke down all 20 topics for at least another hour. So I mean, I'm still getting questions. She's getting questions about all the stuff we covered. So we're trying to push her to starting a podcast as well because she's got a lot of good things to say.
Yeah, no, I think that's really kind of one question I had for you is in the podcast world that you live in. It's really interesting from where I'm sitting just to watch the podcast language and that whole scene in general because, like, in a sense, podcast is really just or podcasting in general is really kind of a way to put like a Cliff Notes story together for somebody to listen to. You know, in many cases, it's a life adventure story from first person narrative, right? That's essentially like, you know, Joe Rogan or any of these other characters who have a podcast. It's like they have somebody there and they have them on there to like kind of walk through some like life adventures. Like what they know, what they've seen, what they've done. And it all bleeds back into this same idea and the same thought that I've had many times, and we've discussed this topic, which is at the end of the day, from a communication standpoint, all we are ever doing is telling stories.
That's the game of life,
like,
man.
Period, everything said and done. So, you know, in every conversation that we have, it's just, like we are literally just not regurgitating. We're telling a story about something that happened to us, something we heard about that happened, something that we had seen, something that took place, you know, something we read about. It's always just like, it's literally, if you're talking to your friend at the coffee shop or having dinner with your family, everyone is just walking through stories of their day.
Yeah, communication.
Microburst stories.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's basically, I think, why sales is such a valued part of our society right now is because being able to communicate with people and walk people. And not only that, I think half of sales is like taking someone somewhere else and being able to have an imagination, walking them through an imagination. And our ancient cultures used to value the storytellers in that sense too, right? Like everything was passed down by stories.
Right.
So I think there's something innately in us that appreciates that in other people. You know, you see someone talk, you're like, man, that guy's a good speaker. He's able to captivate you, you know, whatever that's moving with his hands and all these things. So,
well, I mean, even to what you said about, you know, historically, we've always just passed down tradition and knowledge through storytelling, right? So even in the sense that a podcast is the modern day version of that in a sense. So it's like, it's no surprise that these things have picked up in popularity, and I'm always just fascinated with the content and the information that's shared because up until the internet was invented, up until like, I don't know, let's call it 15 years ago, 20 years ago, this is an analog world in a lot of ways. I mean, there was no conversation, there was no description, there was no discussion about what was going on over in Poland or in Australia or in China or wherever.
Besides the news.
People didn't even know unless Dan Rather told you on ABC Nightly News. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like the transition. And this is like the first form in which people are expressing like, hey, this is what's going on here. This is what we're feeling or fighting against or, you know, excited about or whatever it might be in many different cultures all over the world. And it's the first time we actually get to look at it, see it, touch it, feel it, understand it.
An actual authentic, like you're a person, like I'm a person, you're a person. You're not Dan Rather. You're not getting your orders from someone else. So you can actually peer into someone else's life. And social media, there's some fabrications and it, you know, it's all smoke and mirrors now, which is one of the more frustrating things about the podcast space Instagram, Facebook. You're social media-less,
Right.
pretty much.
No,
Are you
I'm
completely?
off.
He's
Yeah,
gone. He's gone.
I'm not on anything.
So in this episode, I'm going to try to push Wes into creating a daddy father program. It's one of the main reasons I want to have him on today because storytelling, masculine, all these things. Wes, one of the things Wes had talked to me about previously was when you were getting ready to be a father, that there's a huge hole there. Like, did you have any resources? Like when you and Morgan decided, hey, we're gonna have babies. What was your first step?
I think the first is like what I guess was maybe a little bit more dynamic about our situation, or something that I would advise people to consider is a breakdown discussion. Like before both of our time, before we had decided to have a child, like we had multiple layers of discussion.
You had it all,
and we had it to the point where we had like even discussed windows of time in which we wanted to try and conceive based on a variety of factors that we anticipated into the future.
I wonder born on like my grandpa's birthday.
Well, no, not that close, but it'd be more of something along the lines of, I want it, if we're going to have a child in this period of time, like this is the time we need to do it. And that corresponded with like Morgan's school work.
So Morgan was in
school.
So
right.
Kudos to these guys. Morgan was in medical school when they had their first baby.
Morgan was, sophomore or junior, second or junior year, second or third year in med school. So it was, but it was all kind of like we formulated the process and the timeline so that it matched up with.
Hey Jim, can you just make sure we're running? I think we're good. I just always like double checking.
Yeah, you get just too far down a rabbit hole and then you realize
I did press play. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good. I think
I don't have a Brian yet.
No,
hey Jamie, can you pull that up? Jamie, are we even rolling right now?
No,
sorry, you guys are 3 hours in and you never recorded.
So I think the first step was kind of like really formulating a plan. And sometimes for other folks, I don't hear that as often.
I haven't.
And really
can I cut in on you? When I posted the video, Morgan, I took a clip out of it, and one of my friends had commented. I literally said, where do you start to get pregnant? What do you want to do? Do you make a plan? And one of my friends had just commented, is like, people don't know where to start. I'm like, literally, it's not just we're gonna have sex and have a baby. It's like you should be doing things you're talking about, and people don't.
And Morgan probably talked a lot about in that podcast about prepping her body and her
prepping the palace. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And from a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, like and I think the same goes for a man. What's really interesting to me throughout this entire process, what I've learned is that like there is little to no data on the streets readily available for a man.
Yeah. I'm not aware of it.
For a male to really kind of look at, and not only from a pregnancy and from a father perspective, there's no public figures in society that are like known for being a dad, or like examples of like what a good dad looks like or whatever. Like you can't. There is no guidebook or map or just examples, and
we have bad examples.
Yeah,
like literally, that's kind of like the last. We know what they did wrong, but we don't have like
right. And everyone has their own, their own childhood experience. So what ends up ultimately happening is that transitions from what and knew as a child and how you were treated to like what you emulate those exact same threads, right? So point of the story is, you're using old patterns that you were given that you probably didn't even enjoy or like, and not only that, but on top of that, even if you wanted to change your ways, there's nothing to look to.
Yeah, where do I go? There's a really funny meme, and I don't know if this was your experience, and I love you, Dad. And my dad wasn't that bad, but there's like a meme of a boy holding a flashlight. And then the dad is like, my childhood, my dad yelling at me while I held it. Can you hold the damn flashlight straight? Like that's kind of that whole generation that the baby boomers, but they were raised by a generation of guys that came back from World War II. So it's like we're refiguring out all of this stuff.
You bring up a really great cultural generational dynamic. Like, as far as like what the standard definition was. It has changed throughout, the course of time.
Being a man back then, you were a breadwinner, and now it's like I don't know your dynamic. My dynamic in the dating field is like finding a woman that, she wants to pursue her passions and I want to pursue mine. And it used to be the dude went out and did everything and then the female took care of things. So now it's like, okay, how does fatherhood transcend? Like you, in my experience with you, you've, been, boots on the ground with your kids, which in a way that when I've seen other fathers, haven't been that way. Right. And that's a good thing.
Sure.
It's like, but the game's changing.
Right. And I think the game's changing in all aspects of our culture, but forgotten from the change that's taking place on the dad front.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like we see in the news and at work and all these variety of places, like the change that culture is bringing right now on a variety of different fronts. And which is good and bad, right? It's both sides. It goes both ways. And I think at this point, like we hear all of the noise and the drama, and it explodes across the TV screens and the news and the newspapers and the all them news articles online. But you never really, and and even with the mothers. I mean, I'm sure Morgan talked about like the Instagram mother network.
Oh yeah,
like the Facebook mom like network.
It's huge, man.
Yeah, and that doesn't exist for man.
I don't think so.
And it doesn't even exist as like an adult male without children. I mean, it's not anywhere.
Yeah, there's
nothing male related about that entire experience.
Lions Club. Do you know what Lions Club is?
You get like some type of an example of how to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the closest rendering that I've seen to an idea like this would be like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. But that's almost like for any sex. And these are just common traits that you should emulate just to be a good person in society. Those are kind of like, hey, be a good person, say please and thank you, like walk through this world with, like some moral tact. What I'm talking about is specific, defined examples of like what it means to be a dad, specific examples of how those ideas are put into action, because a lot of people read stuff, and Peterson's a great example. It's like, well, you got to, he'll give you this metaphor. It's like clean your room is a great one before you leave the house. Like how are you to challenge or question anything? You can't even clean your house, right? Keep your house clean, which is great. And I've read and looked into a bunch of Peterson, his book there. It is so dense. The commoner is not going to read through that and get the message because it is so thick with like analogy and cost and all this pro and con based analytic theater.
The research shows. Right. You're like, dude, I just want to change a diaper.
It's more like this. Hey, guess what? Your wife, and it literally can say this, your partner just did the craziest things that humans can do. They're going to need a little bit of a timeout from like your bullshit for a while. You know what I'm saying? Like you need to do everything in your that's possible to kind of like cater to them until they get their momentum back, their personal like swagger back, essentially. But
isn't that's kind of the problem with our society now is what you're just talking about is like taking personal responsibility and putting others before yourself. Like that's, I assume, fatherhood. And what you're saying, like these guys who've went their whole life just doing whatever they wanted when they wanted, and all of a sudden now they have not only this baby to take care of, but the woman. And that's exactly what Morgan said. Morgan's like, the father's job isn't usually going to be a lot of the baby taken care of. It's like taking care of the mom. Like you said, hey, your body's all over the place. You're taking care of the baby. You're nursing. You're upset, hormones. And you're like, look, guys, step up forward. It's time to like take over the house, take over everything, and let her do her thing, right?
Sure.
And that's been your experience. And I think that again, was kind of an experience in the past, but things have kind of shifted.
Well, we talked about the generational shifts that we're seeing, and even from the actual idea of being around during the birth itself. Even in the course of human history.
That's new. Yeah, Morgan talked about that.
That isn't part of this story.
What was that like?
Until recently,
you did that twice. I was caught, right?
I caught both kids, and I don't know, as a partner to the other person that's in,
I want to catch my kids.
Like that's your teammate. Like that's your, like essentially like your, best friend, best partner, best, everything.
Tearing
And they're
up your
going to go
life.
through,
Tearing up.
they're going to go through this really hero's journey to introduce a new entity to this earth, which is the craziest thing ever. So I think for men not to even be involved in that process or in that story until kind of just recently, and then on top of that to not really have a place at the table, but then as things have kind of shifted and things are more agreeable, it's becoming more pronounced, but without a true understanding of
It's never been done before.
what your space is supposed to really represent there. And we have a really unique track because we had home births and it was really
So,
kind of different.
and we can talk about you marrying a naturopathic doctor, but when you had thought about having kids, was that something you're like, oh, we're going to home birth, or is that something Morgan brought up, or
No, it was. I'd never considered it before meeting Morgan.
She's the girl that could do it though.
She is, but then I also when she said it, my first thought wasn't like, hell no, you're gonna do what I was just kind of like, why?
You also cut her hair, and within a month of meeting
did
her,
shave her head, within 3 weeks of meeting her. But I think more the sense that we've been doing this forever as humans, So do I believe that we could do it at home and get by safely and make it happen? And, up until 150 years ago, there wasn't even hospitals around.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like,
I think we might
the
be able
course
to
of
do
human
this.
history tells us. And quite honestly, as horrific as it might be, I'm willing to take whatever risk or problem or potential reality that may come from that. Just as the course of human existence unfolds either way,
Yeah, it's true.
I think there's a way to be smart about it and to kind of, again, go in with a plan, know what you're doing. I've even said before this last baby came, I'm totally open to doing something unassisted. I'm totally on board for something like that.
Getting pretty rare there.
Well,
now,
I think that we as humans can, we know innately, we understand the process. And I think it's possible to do that if you know yourself and if you know your partner and if your partner knows their body.
Yeah.
Which
takes, and that's one thing too. You and Morgan are both on the cutting edge of next level humans. You guys really take care of yourselves. You're very mindful. You do daily practices. You're eating well. You're doing all these things to take care of yourself. So it only makes sense that you go above and beyond in everything you do. That's just being a personal friend, outside looking in. Great people. And so when it comes to something like a home birth, there are some of my friends I think that would come up to me yeah, we're going to home birth. I'd be like, I don't know about that. But with you guys, like you said, when Morgan's I'm like, if anyone, it would be those two, no problem.
Right. Right.
So there's definitely some confidence and stuff that comes along with that, just being competent in a wide variety of areas. So
I think in a lot of it, after we did the first one at home, and the second one, but as far as getting comfortability with the whole process in general, to do an unassisted birth, I certainly wouldn't recommend it on your first time around. But if you're gonna do it,
what was it like for you? What was your job? What were you trying to do?
Well, I was just.
Did you have a plan, or just oh shit?
The first one was so long that it was like a marathon. It was 2 days, and it was just brutal.
Did you know that? Did you know it could be 2 days?
I knew 20 hours in that it was okay, this is starting to.
Did you sleep?
No.
Oh man.
This is starting to get into a level of concern.
I can just imagine if there's guys listening to this, right? Oh man, I'm not gonna get to sleep while she's having a baby. Seriously.
Yeah,
though.
no, yeah.
That's some of our men now.
I was getting really fatigued, and so was Morgan. So, it was really an interesting process in general. I think she learned a lot about herself. I think that whole first experience really taught Morgan, a whole different aspect of life. That's kind of some of the lessons you get with a child, which are great. It was hard, but it was also kind of something that she looks back at almost fondly, in a strange way. Because she gritted through some really tough times for her, and not just the birth itself per se, but even after the birth, just kind of some of the challenges of being a first-time mom. And again, there's a lot of resources in that space. The first-time mom, like you can go to boob groups, you can get every book in the world. Like there's sleeping teachers for how to sleep, teach a baby to sleep, and there's every aspect you can think of.
Yeah.
But to tie it in back in, it's like,
did you find any groups for you?
Morgan gave me a book one time before our son was born and was like, hey, I want you to read this. And I read it. I don't remember what it was called, but it was like, she's like, out of all the books, I think this is the book you should be reading, because it was kind of like it was kind of like a doula book.
Okay.
It was like a book for a doula, kind of.
Morgan, am I your doula?
And she's like, well, I just want you to be prepared and know what I'm going through. And I'm like, cool, I'll educate myself on this. But halfway, like I was reading this book and I was like, this is, every night I'd be reading. I'm like, you can ask her about it. Yeah. I just complain all the time. I'm like, this is literally the worst book I've ever seen. And I'm like, this is pathetic. This is a partner's book.
Oh, like this is for guys too?
This was, it was for guys, or if a girl was going to be there to support, whatever. But it was kind of geared toward the partner in general. And I was like, this is horse. Yeah. This is total horse BS. And I was like, I could write this. Yeah. It's just like, and it was so simply put. It was just like, your partner is going to be experiencing some physical pain. So make sure that you're, comfort them. And then it would say, and they might feel a little overwhelmed and anxious. So please don't take anything they say to heart. Mm-hmm. And, I was just like, what? Like, this person's going to be giving birth here. Like, what the fuck? What is this? Yeah. It was just terrible.
Yeah.
And for me, and she kept saying it, she's like, well, why don't you, after this is over, why don't you write something of yourself? Yeah. Write your own guidebook to how to do this.
Hey, that's why we're here. We're going to get Wes to write us a daddy book.
Honestly, I don't know if it would be too far off for me to even do something like that, because the resources are so poor.
Yeah. Did they even have, like you said, boob groups? Did they have anything like that for dads? I don't even know.
And not only if they did, I don't think any dad's going.
Yeah.
Because there's just there's a vibe to.
It's like on Bumble they have BFFs. Do you know this?
No.
On Bumble you can look for best friends, and I'm just kind of like, what kind of guy goes on Bumble to look for best friends? And maybe there's people out there that do it. I'm not ripping on you, but I just like that takes an interesting personality. I'm going to create Bumble to find me a best friend.
And that's half the problem with getting this information to men. Mm-hmm. Most of them are too.
Yeah, I hope there's some guys listening.
Most of them are too prideful to even take the knowledge.
Yeah.
Like to take the story and like listen to it, and because it's either I don't have time for this, or I'm going to be fine, or like I already know. Like how hard could it be, or whatever, and truthfully, and that's why I kind of started with, got to make sure you're taking care of your partner first. But like the first, I don't know, at least year, you're like,
do you remember you lived with me for a couple of those months, man? Yeah. Wes is up at like 4 a.m. doing work, and then.
Yeah, you're grinding, but you're also like, as far as the baby's concerned, you're hanging. And you're really kind of taking care of the, your partner and their needs, because they're up all night with the baby and that kind of thing. And certainly I was in this situation, but, I guess the moral of the story and the point of what I'm trying to make here is most of it's on your partner. Mm-hmm. So you're not
you're not breastfeeding.
Everybody thinks like, oh, you have a baby, and immediately you, being the dad or whatever, is like filled with baby duties. And it's like, kind of. Yeah. Not really.
And not to be sexist, there's a biological impulse.
Totally.
Like with the baby and the mom, that thing was in the mom for 9 months, and then breastfeed. Like, you're not going to breastfeed it. There's more oxytocin between baby and mommy. So it's like, as dad, you're the X factor. Like, where do I come in? And
you could not. That's spot on, Michael. You couldn't make it illustrate it any better, because that's exactly the scenario.
What worked for you and what worked for you guys.
Well, I think that's what's happening in most cases, because it is exactly what you said. There's like a biological component to that togetherness, that closeness, the skin to skin thing, the whole gamut.
Did you get jealous at all?
No.
Because I've heard that some fathers were like, where the baby's like the mom.
If anything, it made me turn up the volume on the level of support for my wife, because I was just like, I know she's doing everything she can, literally up all night and, not sleeping and feeding, 12 times a day and doing all this stuff. And like, that's just like as much love and as coolness factor there is to being a new mom. It's also like that. It's not a job you want,
Yeah.
you know, it's not like you want, you know, like you sign up every day and like, I want to do this forever.
Yeah.
You know, most guys by the end of the baby newborn phase are kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm just I'm worn out for this.
Well, Morgan made a really good point about that, prepping the palace, about how it's like, you get your body, you know, man and female, like, get your sleep now, take your vitamins, because when that thing comes, you guys are going to be, you know, on full blast for a while, like using every resource. So it's like, make sure you get your B vitamins tested, make sure that you get sleeping well now, because the next year, like, you know, you're going to be taking care of this new entity.
Yeah, no, the sleep thing's for real. It's funny when you step back. I think here's another analogy I like to use, and I try and put this together in all aspects of life, really, not even just fatherhood, but we're, as people, are just so in the weeds every day. We are like in the matrix, walking around, trying to manage, and all of our interactions are just like, we're in the weeds with everything that we're doing. And what I like to do every once in a while is take a counterclockwise turn on the lens of life. Okay. So like if you're down, like, you know, down here, and then you zoom out, like you can get a view of your whole life and just go, so you can kind of see like what's going on. It's not, you're not like, you know, the same size as an ant. You're back to human size, and you can look down and see like what is going on. So that's what I try and do with my life all the time, because with work and all these other, you know, responsibilities, you're, you know, already being a dad in this case for me, and, you know, various other tasks that I have, you can get so overwhelmed so fast, especially with a new baby and all the challenges and the emotional. Did
you get overwhelmed time or two? Pretty close.
I think it's really helping. I think the biggest thing that I'd write, if I was writing a book,
if you could go back and give Wes advice
for the first time around, or the second?
First time. I'm talking like before you're having the first baby.
Time. Yeah, first time around.
What do you tell yourself?
I thought I'd handle it as good as I probably could have, truthfully. But even still, I would say go back and
even me.
I would double down on your partner.
Okay.
And I've said that like 4 times tonight. Because they're the captain of the ship, and they're supposed to be. And that role is built in for them. So honor that. Let them run captain, be that crew or that deckhand, and just, you know, clean up everything on the back end, make all the food, do all the stuff, like, you know, just take care, make everything as easy as possible for them, just so that they can land the plane and you know, exit properly. That's the number one. Second thing is, you have to shift into a new character role. That's the biggest thing for man, for a guy, or even for another partner for that matter, is when this transition takes place and this new person, this new entity becomes a new part of your family or what have you, it's new responsibility. You have to understand that you are transitioning from an old person that used to be footloose and fancy free in most cases for the new dads, and could drop at the hat, go and do this, that, or the other. No responsibility to like time or space outside of, you know, like making sure that everything's cool with your gal. Oh, yep, cool. I'm going golfing for the weekend. Yep. You know, like whatever. And, you know, trips, all of it. All the chicanery going on with the downtown outings when you're a kid, you know, like when you're younger and just kind of making a mess of town, and like all the fun stuff, everything. You transition into a new role, like a character in a play. And then like, it's almost like the end of that first movie is over. American Pie 2 just ended. Okay.
No more Stiffmeister, huh?
Yeah.
God.
Stifler. And then you're transitioning into like, I can't even think of a movie. I don't know movies that well, but like a new movie where you are a new character.
Can we go with Interstellar? No, that's a bad one. He leaves. Sorry, I can't think of what's a good one.
But point of the story is like, you're literally in the play that is your life. You're on stage 2, and the mannerisms and the patterns and the attitudes and the decision-making process and everything about what you used to do needs to be changed. And people don't make the switch. They continue to live in this old life with this new life. And that and a lot of time that's where all the friction, in my opinion, I literally see it. The friction starts there because they're like, wait, I used to do X, Y, and Z, and now I'm compromised.
Yeah, I think that's great. Even relationship advice.
Totally.
I have that problem. Like once you're in a relationship, I go to the gym this time. Like I'm in a relationship or I had a baby. It's like,
right. And I think starting a new job, starting a new relationship, it's kind of the major foundational factors of kind of the cultural experience. You're shifting into a new role, period. And I like to equate a lot of like life in general as kind of like your play. It's like, you go to a Broadway play and you watch a play. Well, I think the play is going on outside in the Matrix all the time. And you can, like, as an observer, just watch people in your play, and the people that come into your house, the Kramers and the Georges and the Elaines of your life, those are
Steve
like,
Urkel.
those are characters in your play, right? Yeah. And you get to pick those players.
Yeah.
So, in a lot of cases, so keep that in mind. And, adjust your character as your situation changes.
Okay.
That's a big piece of this. That's going to solve a lot of problems.
Double down on your partner.
And double down on yourself.
Double down on yourself.
That's really what it is. Like, know that you're going to make that change.
Yeah. And Morgan had talked about too, when she was prepping her body and how she was treating herself so well for the baby. And she was just kind of dumbfounded, like why she didn't do that all the time. But I guess, for real, like, okay, well, I'm going to eat healthy because of the baby. I'm going to do this because of the baby. And
for her, it was, I'm going to stop smoking cigarettes.
Yeah. Morgan's Morgan smoked cigarettes and booze. And yeah, we had to take the Jameson away from her after the first trimester. That was obviously a joke. We're not, that's probably child
I'm
abuse.
joking, of course.
So that would probably be your third thing would be double down on yourself. Working on, how did you get through, how do you find self-help or you can't pour from an empty cup,
Right.
Did that bear down on you much? Or
I think,
but you probably got a good morale boost. Like, I don't know about you, but me personally, when I provide and I do those things, I feel better. Like, you can run on less sleep when it's like,
sure, yeah.
Mom's sleeping, baby's
especially
sleeping.
because it's your team,
Yeah.
Like, that's my squad. So it's like, if I lose some sleep, it's like, oh well.
Yeah.
I think that to answer your question, this is what I'd say. All too often, especially males, they look at their family as a place to gain like acceptance and where they're going to fill your cup.
The family's going to fill
The
you.
family's going to supposed to be like, oh yeah, like the family's going to essentially kind of give back to me because I'm giving everything I can. I'm funneling through here and it's all like this love reciprocal thing. And to me, it's kind of like, rather than rely on your family to provide that aspect of your life, I'm sure that there's components of that are good, but I almost look at it more of like, your family is a blank canvas and you are the artist. So instead of like looking at them as a reliant thing, look at them like, this is a blank space for me to create anything that I want. Like, as far as like my son and his development, or my daughter and the way I support my wife and her, like I can create any scenario, any like creative idea that I want. And it's a place to like replenish and like take all the skills that I've gained from outside of that space to plug in there, rather than like have that be just part of the drain of life, or like the reciprocal motions that we're going through. It's more of like, let me steal everything I can get from all of these other places and pump it through here, the best stuff I got, just to see, because it's like, at the end of the day, my theory is like, if you're doing this right, if you're doing all of this right, at the end of the day, it's not whether or not you have the best day. It's whether or not your kids or your wife have the best day, right? So it's like, if your kid has an A+ day, you should be feeling like you had an A+ day, because that's really, at the end of the day, that's all we're really aiming at.
Yeah.
Is to like, at least for me, as a father and as a person in our family, my goal is to create levels of happiness within the people that I care about the most. So it's like if I have to work to gain income to buy a plane flight so that we could go to a trip or something, like however it plays out, it could be, whatever.
That's beautiful, Wes.
Yeah, but if you think about it, it's true. I mean, that's really the angle. Well, and if you're not, if that's not in your considerations, then like that's father, part of that transition part. Yeah. Like, again, I used to think for myself and like, oh, I'm going to go out of town and go watch this basketball match or whatever, and like now it's kind of like
you and I 2000
right
11
and now 12. I'm trying, I'm doing everything I can to kind of create those ideas and those spaces and I think if you're doing it right and you're creating that love and that magic, then a lot of your problems won't exist in this space. They might be somewhere else, but if this is kind of your safe haven anyway, I think you're safe there.
Tony Robbins has a quote, and
Tony's a friend of mine.
You and Tony, you and Anthony go back
way back.
Been to his walking on.
I jumped into his Cairo tank.
Yeah. But one of his favorite things I've heard him say was, "It's not what we get; it's what we become, so we can give." It's not what I get from other people. It's me transforming myself into something awesome, and then I'm able to provide more, which is, I think, kind of a summary of what you said as, being a father. It's like, man, I learned all these things through life. And in my time knowing you too, you've always been a good source of, hey, this was my experience when I did this. Like, I know you've given me some dating tips when I got into the San Diego scene. Hey, take a bottle of wine over there in La Jolla, take them up to the top of the hill. And there is something to be said about being able to pass things on, and I think that's a beautiful way. You just talked about fatherhood, giving that to your kids.
Sure.
and I agree with you. I do see with our generation there's just this Epicureanism. That was like the Greek, like the nation is born stoic and dies Epicurean. So stoicism is like you take hard events and they make you stronger and better, and then a nation dies Epicurean, meaning that your life's about indulging in all the good things. The quotes, hard times make hard men make good times make weak men make hard times make, kind of like that.
Sure.
It kind of turns itself over, and you and I have talked about this at length, just kind of where society's going, and we got to figure some things out. Pretty quick here. And I think fatherhood's one of the big areas that we really have to get in on.
Well, you had mentioned, because we talking about fatherhood, and one of the stats, and I don't know this. God, I wish I had the numbers directly. I
got some on my phone, man. Tell me which one you want to bring up.
Well, there's a stat that it's complicated.
You mean to ramble some? I got some right here.
Wait. Yeah,
90% of all homeless and runaway children are from a father's home.
90%.
63% of youth suicides, fatherless home. 80% of rapists with anger problems come from a father's home. And this is on like a website. It says the fatherless generation. So maybe these are skewed, but there's sources. 71% of high school dropouts, fatherless homes, which is 9 times the average. That's from the National Principals Association report. And I'm trying to think. It's been really bad since the 70s, I think.
So that's what I was going to bring up.
Is that the stat?
I don't remember. The stats are, and this really goes back to Johnson. Again, we should talk about people being misinformed. But Lyndon Johnson, after he killed Kennedy, he... Just saying. Do your homework.
And Oswald. Those 2 bullets, guys. Get
Oswald.
educated.
The Oswald excuse is just the most ridiculous. Anyway.
If you have not looked into it, look into that. Seriously. I still am like, there's a rat there.
Yeah. Anyway, so after Johnson took over, he implemented a large range of service-based law, like law or movement programs, which is welfare. What is the one where they give you food?
Food stamps.
Well,
some of that, I think it got turned up. A lot of that came from the New Deal or whatever, I think, during World War II. But you're right that it got turned up, and they're like...
So in the 60s, they essentially started to provide all of these services to low-income individuals.
Which there were some people that needed it.
Yeah,
some,
no,
right?
I'm not saying that the programs didn't help people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. But the reaction, the result of those programs over time misplaced a wide range of people and essentially kind of let things from a systems-based standpoint got a little out of control, numbers-wise. And I think the number is like in 1960, like in the 1962, 63, something like that, more Caucasian males were leaving the home or, divorce or just leaving the home of a family than African-American males. It was like, I think African-American males was like, God, I wish I had the stats in front of me, but it was like 13% or something. So super low.
Yeah.
Super low.
I wish I had these. I think Jordan Peterson's talked about that before.
And then by the stats now, because of where that money was really kind of influenced kind of the lower income areas, which, back in the 60s and the 70s, and as things have transitioned, a lot of that was the African-American community in various cities across the country.
Oh, yeah.
And the stat has ballooned to like 60%.
Yeah.
So essentially, men not feeling the moral obligation or, I don't want to say guilt, but the moral obligation to stick around and do the right thing, be the father for some of these kids. But I'm going to go because the system's going to pay for my absence.
I'm trying to think who I heard say it. They said basically all those laws allowed women to marry the state. And again,
financially.
Well, and this backtracks on everything we just said about being a father. Like part of, growing up is becoming something that you're able to give back to your kids, like you're saying. And that's the most beautiful part about fatherhood. And so to have the state come in and be like, well, you don't even have to marry her because she can get welfare and food stamps. And then,
right.
Then she's fine. And she's not fine. Like those are not, I'm not saying that. I'm saying those programs, there's plenty of times they're needed, but it's a cop-out.
What we're saying, and we're not discussing even the programs or any of the services, what we're saying is that the result of those programs are X. And that's facts are facts.
Yeah, and there's maybe a percentage of that was good, but there's a large part that's like, wow, look at the divorce rate.
Right. The divorce rate.
You've heard too, birth control. So one of the big arguments for the increase in birth rate is birth control. And so for those people who don't know, birth control in the 60s, right, was when it really got big. And when women take oral hormonal birth control, basically what they're doing is tricking their body into being pregnant. And they've done studies on women, and they show that women throughout their cycle are attracted to different men. You've heard this? When women are ovulating, they're attracted to a more, I would say, alpha male, like men that are a little more on the aggressive end. They're willing to take chances and risks because that's who they want to mate with. And then when they're on their period, they're more attracted to a beta male. They're looking for a male that, and I don't want those to get misconstrued about alpha and beta, but just men who are a little less lower on the dominance hierarchy, you would say.
A little less aggressive.
More caring. And so what they started to find out is, and this is one of the reasons divorce rates are so high, is that women get on birth control when they're 16. Right? So they didn't even go through, they didn't even have their period. They don't even know what they're like. They didn't go through the hormonal fluctuations. Then they start dating a guy at 18. They get married at 22. They say, hey, let's get pregnant. She gets off the birth control, and then she's not attracted to the guy anymore. Because literally hormones play with your emotions. So that's another huge kind of like thing on top of all that. You got the state coming in over here, you got birth control coming in over here, and then more women entering the workforce, so men and women don't know how to interact in the workforce, and it's just like got ourselves in a pickle.
And and not only that, but they do everything they can on TV, in the news, in movies, in books, and all over the internet to just sow the divide and raise chaos. It only complicates and raises anxiety and depression rates throughout the country for both genders. And so it's like you add that and the stimuli and the anxiety of day in, day out pressures, your kids going to school during the day, and you know both parents are gone running them, doing everything they can to keep up financially and pay all their bills.
What was that like moving into the daycare scene, man? How did you guys...
Well, I think for me, I work from home. I have a remote job. So, we did, and Morgan at the time with Gage, when our first, she was still in school at that point. So we were trying to kind of match her schedule with my work schedule, and then like having a third party come in at certain times when I was working, and so on and so forth. So it was more of a blended, which was really pretty unique for,
oh, this day and age, man.
yeah, like I was watching my son often, and as a young child, like as a baby, and my wife would be at school all night. I mean, she, at this point in time, she's at school all night, every night.
Yeah.
So it was like I was putting the baby down like 5 nights a week.
Dang, super dad over here. That's probably unheard of. I wonder what that stat is, unless you're a single dad.
It was a lot. I mean, it depended on the school schedule and the time of year, and all that shifted around, and it changed like every 8 weeks or 12 weeks, where it was just crazy. And we moved into the tiny house.
Yeah, they were in a tiny house. Like Wes is a good 6'5",
6'5".
Yeah, he's not a small guy.
We moved
Morgan's
into a 8 foot wide by 28 foot wide long trailer, which was, it was a good time.
Yeah, it was a nice place, man. I have some
great.
fond memories over there of eating some Jamie's pancakes, man. So,
so yeah, I mean, between that, kind of all that going on, it was a really interesting time to be a dad. I think the other thing that I would add into the kind of reverting back to the kid conversation here is the value of having other people as part of your community. I know, I don't know if Morgan mentioned that, but just the extra hands and the influence that additional people can have on your child. I mean, obviously pick your spots here with that, and like you don't want, you gotta be smart about who you want around your child all the time. But like if you've got the right people with love in their heart, they can do a lot of value for you, and just kind of like assisting with, not even assisting, but just being another voice of like love and reason and understanding, and the kids can turn to other individuals except for mom and dad. Because, that becomes so dominant. Like mom and dad are just these two figures as a kid that you're just like, oh my God. Like the idea of having an additional people to kind of teach them things and show them the way, like morally and ethically. And when they're out, at parks and, other places that, I don't know, I think there's a boatload of value there.
Oh, 100%, man.
And I'd like to, make that a part of my future. So there's a big piece of that in children and being a father and all that kind of stuff as well.
How are you going to handle the middle kid age? Like when he starts getting 6, 7, 8. Like I think your experience is probably similar to mine. Mm-hmm. Got on the bike. I was like 8 maybe. I'd get on my bike and I'd ride all over town.
Right.
Me, and I'd be, hey, yeah, I'm going over to my friend's house, and we'd all get in the bike. And I don't really see that right now. I don't know if that's because birth rates.
I don't see kids on the street ever, dude.
And maybe it's because we're still in a pretty suburban area here.
Yeah.
But I assume, it was like, we'd get 10 kids together and go
riding
play kickball,
and
basketball at the park and stuff. How are you?
Dude, I don't even know if that's still going on in society. Like I've got friends who have 5th graders and they're just playing Fortnite.
Yeah.
They're just playing with each other and hanging out with each other digitally.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't want that to be part of our future. Because I think that's just.
Do you feel comfortable though if he's like, Dad, like 8 years old, getting on a bike and like, I'm going down the Sprouts? It's like, has there been a coddling of our kids now?
I think there has been, certainly to a certain extent. I would love to provide a little bit of a more of a lengthier leash, almost like comparatively speaking, to other parents. Like, whoa. Like that.
Well, and with cell phones, man, I can't imagine being a kid now. Your parents know where you are all the time.
Yeah. But I would love for them to have that much freedom.
Yeah.
And just to be able to go out and do that, even as an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
To get like a mile or two away from the house.
You ride the bike up and down the drive. To this street, no further.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I also think there's value in numbers. So if you can tag them up with another person, be like, I think there's ways of still doing a lot of those things, which you don't see. And I've asked. It's funny you brought that up because I brought that up to somebody else recently. I was like, I don't really see kids riding their bikes anywhere.
No.
Like I've lived in 3 legitimate neighborhoods, or University City.
Yeah.
Over by Rat Tail Manor.
Slayer Mansion's over there.
Slayer Mansion. Like I never saw a kid once anywhere. And I don't see him in this neighborhood either.
Yeah, and we got houses. Like this is a very residential.
Residential's
like there's got to be kids in every house here. These are like 3-4 bedroom houses.
Right. So it's very, very astute point, Michael. I
Well,
think things have changed so much.
well, and I wonder too. I was at church, and the pastor told a story about he was in Santa Ana, in L.A., and he was 7. He had a younger sister who was 5, and he had an older sister, or an older brother who was 9. And they used to get like, don't talk to strangers. I don't know if they teach kids that anymore. Or like, if they have candy, don't go by the candy man. And he told a story about how they always thought that was BS until one day he was walking down the street and this guy came up to him in a car and says, "Hey kids, I got some candy." He's like, so they all like froze because they're like, "Oh shit, they told us about this. Like, this actually happens." And to me, I was thinking, I'm like, that doesn't happen anymore. Like a 5-year-old, 7 and 9-year-old leaving the house alone. He's like, "Yeah, we'd go down. We were like 3 miles from the beach. We'd go down to the beach for the day and come back." And I don't know what that's going to have on the effect on kids and socially. And the cell phone thing scares me, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
How have you managed technology with your kids thus far? What's your game plan there? That's a book.
It's
man,
very interesting because you don't want them to fall too far behind.
Oh, socially?
Well, not social. I think if anything, keep them the technology away as much as you can, so that they can develop the social functionality of their existence. Because the screens are going to be there forever, regardless, right?
Yeah.
So you might as well. What's a Dr. Bruce Lipton?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so
Yeah, explain people, Bruce.
Dr. Lipton is is he a child?
He's a
psychologist. Or is he
I think he was. I thought he was a
pediatric.
I thought he was a cell biologist.
Really?
Yeah. Are we thinking Bruce Lipton, or are you thinking of Greg Braden?
No.
Bruce Lipton.
Lipton.
Yeah,
Lipton.
he's like Lipton's all about like cells, and they could figure out that they could, with your mind, you could change what they differentiated into, and he's all about mindset and how it affects.
So yeah, that's Lipton. So
Yeah.
Lipton was basically saying, and this podcast is on YouTube. I've seen it. You just type in Dr. Bruce Lipton, like child rearing or child, what do they call it? Raising.
Yeah. Baby
time
raising.
period. He basically says that your child. This changed my life. I mean, I think you said, what would you do as a new dad? Like, this would be the first thing I listened to as a new parent. Mom or dad. Lipton.
All right.
Basically outlines that your child will download, essentially create the software in which it operates its entire decision-making and emotional process from the ages of 3 to 7, or like 2.5 to 7 years old. That, and then everything after 7, it's kind of like every experience is filtered through that software that was kind of downloaded. So every experience, they learn about greed, they learn about good and bad, they learn about like loss, they learn about empathy and sympathy, and every emotion they go through like human experiences where they learn what those emotions are